start off by asking, so what was the prevailing question that came to your mind when you heard about gender violence? What comes to your mind as an activist, as whatever capacity you're in? I'll start with Esther. Esther, share with us, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Esther, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Stella. To me, gender-based violence basically refers to harmful acts directed to an individual based on their gender. We have seen a few cases where it is the men that are the victims. Most cases are the women. So to me, it is a serious violation of human rights, and it is threatening to health. So it is something that we really need to open our eyes to and come together and fight against as a nation and as a continent. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. We could also hear from the others. Could go first, then Doreen, then who? Then Annette, please.
Okay. So the question that comes to mind for me when I think of gender-based violence is definitely the education around violence and domestic abuse in relationships, because statistics show from the UK at least that the majority of people who are actually disproportionately affected by domestic abuse are young girls 18 to 25, that age group who are just finished college or sixth form here. So looking at the actual education they have surrounding what is an abusive relationship, where are your signs, when do you need to stop, when is it the time to say, okay, this is too much? Because as you've already said by the definition that Esther gave us, domestic abuse isn't always physical. Sometimes it's the really loud shouting for no reason. Sometimes it's the banging the wall, breaking things around you, even if it's not touching you. So I think it's important to look at that. And again, as Esther said, it is men as well. I think for the UK, the statistics are 4.2% for men, 7.4% for women. So I think it's an important thing that needs to be tackled on that aspect. Also, I think for Manchester specifically, where I'm from, we had 32,500 cases when it came to domestic violence that were actually reported to the police. So that means there were a lot more that went unreported, and a lot of people who weren't able to report because it was too late. And that was actually an 11.4% increase from last year. So it's not getting better. There isn't anything in place that's actually helping. So for me, it's the education around it and how severe are the sanctions when someone is caught or in that act of actually committing the domestic abuse.
Thank you, Doreen, then Annette.
Yeah, so just to continue off of what the others have said, when I initially thought of gender-based violence, I'd always just think of the physical or the sexual, but there's actually other things that fall under abuse, whether it's emotional, financial, etc. And just like Anita said, men do get affected, but obviously it's not at the same rate as women get affected. So often men who experience abuse, they won't say anything about it because of gender expectations and stereotypes that men have to be the stronger ones. So that they're supposed to have in society, so they won't speak up and they'll suffer in silence. So that's one thing I think about. Then another thing I think about is a lot of the times women are expected to go out of their way to protect themselves or prevent abuse from happening to them. But I think it needs to involve everybody. Both boys and men need to be educated about abuse or violence so that they know not to do it, instead of expecting women to do everything that they can to prevent it from happening to them.
Annette, we're waiting for you. Admission, you could just go after her.
Okay, thank you. So me, when it comes to gender-based violence, I feel its main causes are disrespect for human rights, gender inequality, and abuse of power. And when I hear of gender-based violence, my first thought is the survivors. In most cases, they want to get justice. So we want cases of GBV to be investigated and perpetrators prosecuted for their crimes, and also they need to provide compensation to the survivors. Most of the time, we blame survivors instead of holding the perpetrators, accountable. So because without them, who oppresses us and make us victims, we won't be like having this kind of conversation. So survivors need legal support, they need health support, they need psychological support, but these actually in most cases tend to be very expensive for ordinary people to afford. Ordinary people include men, women, girls, children. It's so hard for them to afford. Though in my country we have organizations and institutions that provide free legal aid to survivors of violence and also facilitate their court representation for free. And again, thinking of it, delivering justice to victims of GBV requires strong policies and strong legal framework that should protect human rights and ensure effective mechanisms when administering justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You all mentioned